Hello, welcome to Get Used to It, a new monthly program produced by the City of West Hollywood, examining critical issues affecting America's gay and lesbian community. My name's Sheila Kuehl, and I'll be your host each month as we explore the challenges and issues that face lesbian and gay Americans on a daily basis. We decided our first show, actually history in the making, given when it's being brought to you, should focus on the upcoming election. You would have had to be on Mars not to notice how gay and lesbian civil rights have been used by both sides in the presidential race for diametrically different reasons. This election will affect the lives of each and every lesbian and gay person, and we're going to try to explore today in depth just what's at stake. Our guests today are David Mixner, a prominent political consultant, currently a member of Democratic presidential candidate Bill Clinton's National Steering Committee, one of our community's sharpest political minds, who successfully won the battles against the Briggs Initiative, Prop 6, and the LaRouche Initiative, Prop 64. Welcome, David.
Thanks.
Really glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Actually, we have three of our community's most brilliant political minds. Here's number two, Torie Osborn, who's been active for the past 25 years in both the women's movement and the lesbian and gay movement. She's currently executive director of the Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center here in Los Angeles. But she announced that she's going to be stepping down in October and was recently named the new executive director of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. Welcome, Torie.
Thanks.
We're going to miss you when you move to Washington. Glad you're here today. Finally, my third brilliant guest, Charles Stewart, currently Chief Deputy for State Senator Diane Watson. Charles served as a member of Jesse Jackson's National Steering Committee for his 1988 presidential bid. He's a contributing editor for BLK Magazine, the nation's leading African-American gay and lesbian publication. He's a member of both the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the NAACP. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you.
Well, here we are. We're going to talk about the election. I guess the first question that viewers will have, and certainly the first question I want to pose to you is, why is this election important to us? David, you're working in Clinton's campaign. You must think it's important to us in some way. What do you think?
I actually think it's historic. I think it's the most important election in the history of our community. Everything's at stake. It's like we have the Prince of Darkness and the Prince of Light. On one side, we have a person who will practice and continue to practice repression, do little on AIDS, appoint more Clarence Thomases to the Supreme Court, take away a woman's right to choose. And on the other side, we have a candidate who is committed to passing progressive civil rights legislation and executive orders for gays and lesbians, who will declare war on AIDS, who will appoint distinguished people to the Supreme Court of this land and the federal court, other federal judiciary appointments, and who will fight hard to protect Roe versus Wade in the process. And
why 92, though? I mean, it doesn't seem like all of a sudden, even all of a sudden he's interested in us, in a sense?
Actually, it's not all of a sudden, and actually it's the work of the gay and lesbian community that has made it 92. This has been long in the making. Many people who are no longer here with us have had literally died for this cause. What it means is that we as a community has matured to the degree that we are ready to sit at the table of power, that we are politically sophisticated enough to determine our own destiny politically. And we have historically met a candidate who is willing to pull back the chair and say, have a seat. That he understands our aspirations and our dreams. And so it's a mutual historical alliance. It's one of those, actually for this community, very fortuitous events. We're ready, and he was ready, and we came together in what I consider a very historical alliance that will mean that never again will this community be the same politically.
So has it had an impact on the ways in which we're involved, though?
Substantially. We are at, usually historically, up until through 1988, we got one position in a campaign, and that was the lesbian and gay liaison to the community. And It was one person who always got that position, and we had to argue to get that. Now we're co-chairing statewide campaigns. We're on the National Finance Committee, the National Executive Committee. We have people doing events and scheduling and press. And to see some of the young lesbian and gay men who are in the campaign learning all these new skills of how to do advance work, how to do scheduling, how to do press. It's an extraordinary exciting, it's an opportunity we've never been presented with before, and we've seized it very dramatically and are taking advantage of it.
Charles, in working on the local level, have you seen a difference, any difference that this campaign is making in our community?
Well, I think that in terms of galvanizing people who are interested in being on a winning team, I think that heretofore we've been able to play a symbolic role. Mm-hmm. We've been involved, we've supported Democratic candidates in the past, but we haven't been able to go with the candidate the distance. Now we're beginning to taste victory, and I think that that's important and significant, and it's something we've earned, it's something we deserve. And so now it's just making it to the end, making sure that the candidate wins, and that we are there to make it clear to everyone, to remember ourselves and to remind the world that we're here, we're not going anywhere, so get used to it.
Well, the other thing is, it was clear, I mean, it was amazing to me at the Democratic Convention how much presence we had, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the show. But have you seen any impact from that kind of positive stuff just at the local level, both in the races? I mean, we have a lot of people running for office at the local level, and none of our people necessarily yet made it through the into the finals, but just in terms of the way people are thinking about us in their own campaign.
I think people are motivated to be involved politically this year. I think that in my own case, my boss, Senator Watson, is running for supervisor. We've worked very closely, much more closely than ever before, and that isn't because there hasn't been a mutual willingness, but because people are now active. They are participating at all levels, and so we've gotten there's a much larger gay and lesbian presence in our campaign open. And that is true not merely in our campaign, but in all campaigns, in campaigns that affect urban areas, in campaigns that affect suburban areas, in campaigns that affect the Latino community. All of our communities are finally beginning to realize that we all have a role to play, self-defined roles, and that we are going to play those roles. We are going to step up to the table and take our seat and participate.
So is there more acceptance of lesbian and gay people of color who are out in the various communities in which candidates are running?
Well, I'm out and and have been consistently, and there are a number of people who have. I think that it's very important to realize, for instance, that immediately after the uprising here in Los Angeles last spring, that it was Phil Wilson, the mayor's AIDS liaison, who is a black and an openly gay man and who is HIV positive, led the peaceful demonstration into Simi Valley. Mm-hmm. So many people focused our attention, understandably, on the violence, but there was also something that triggered that, and that was the verdicts. Mm-hmm. And it is very important that lesbian and gay leadership of color stepped into the leadership position and caravanned us out there. And I mean, it was an exciting and a somewhat frightening thing to do, but it needed to happen. And we were joined by a number of civil rights organizations, traditional civil rights organizations, who never before have shared a podium with us. And I don't know that they were necessarily ready to up until that moment, until it happened. But there they were, there we were.
So what are the implications, Torie? Since you're here, obviously, I mean, here you are, the national movement, right? Or at least
not yet.
The once and future executive director of the task force. In terms of how the movement or the movement's responsibility or how we're responding, why is this important to us this year? I mean, we've kind of abjured electoral politics sometimes in the movement.
Well, this opens up a whole new day for the movement. I mean, it completely reframes the issues of the future. If Bill Clinton gets into office within some amount of time, we know he's going to sign a ban on discrimination in the military. He's going to help pass the federal civil rights legislation. I mean, we have been working against a right wing, powerfully organized against us for the last 12 years, against genocidal indifference in the Reagan-Bush campaigns on AIDS. We've had to fight for every inch of the terrain. And what happens is a couple of things. First of all, a Clinton victory sends out a green light from the top. It puts leadership stamp on tolerance, on homophobia, as unacceptable as a form of bigotry. We always say homophobia has become sort of the last acceptable form of bigotry. Doesn't mean racism and sexism are dead, but homophobia has been the last to fall. And with leadership that is, explicitly pro-gay rights on certain issues, what it does is it means we get to move forward on the issues that we have public support for, discrimination, the military, and so forth. But more importantly, it opens up for the 90s the political space for us to really move forward on domestic partnership and gay marriage, on gay youth, gay and lesbian youth issues, teenage suicide, 3 times the national average. And so what you'll see is a totally changed terrain. Not only will you see a queer voting bloc, I mean, it is conceivable that 85 to 90% of our community, both Republicans and Democrats are going to vote as a bloc in this election. The kind of money that's been raised in this campaign and the way that this campaign, as Charles and David was saying, has really acted in our interest to galvanize and mobilize our own community. Thousands of unactive people have been brought in since the Democratic convention, which embraced us, and the Republican convention, which excoriated us.
Really.
You see people. I mean, I've been speaking at gay and lesbian Clinton house parties with people who have never voted before, much less gone to a house party, much less been active. So what I'm saying is that you're seeing an unprecedented level of activity, of mobilization, of organization that will help build our movement. In a very real sense, the Clinton campaign is helping us build our movement. And that can only help us provide the kind of advocacy work and public opinion movement, framing of issues, media activism, and so forth, as we go into the 90s on the tougher issues, the gay marriage, the youth issues, the parenting issues.
So I think part of what you're saying too, or what I heard, is there's a little more of a breathing space. I mean, we've had to fight for every half an inch of gain. For everything.
And if we have a little
breathing
space, wide open. It will open wide, wide up political terrain we haven't begun to walk on.
And the other thing we can't forget is the real impact this has on people's lives directly. For 50 years now, interesting enough, in January will be the 50th anniversary of the executive order that made it legal to ban gays and lesbians from the military. For 50 years, thousands, tens of thousands of gay men and lesbians have been driven out of the military, given dishonorable discharges, some court-martialed, disgraced in their families, some had lobotomies performed on them. Literally, we're still doing 1,000 to 2,000 a year, driving and being driven. Some of the best and brightest that our country has to offer are being driven out of the military simply because at a cost of millions and millions of dollars. With a stroke of a pen by Bill Clinton, that will be over. And we will be able to get on to things that will improve people's life, not fight just repression. It's such a difference.
It's true. It's a difference. I mean, a positive agenda is a very different thing. And I think we've been stuck, not because we chose it, but in a place where we needed to be fighting always against discrimination. Very difficult, which is a ploy to keep us from getting anywhere normally.
We've been fighting for our lives. I mean, we've been fighting against a government that hasn't given a darn about our community, to just try to save people's lives and get dollars for treatment for AIDS. I mean, we can't even get a quarter of the appropriation of the Ryan White Care Act that has been authorized. I mean, so it's going to completely turn around.
Torie, something you said too was about house parties and money, and the impact. The other side of this is really the impact that our community can have on the election. And I know there's been a lot of money raised from this community.
It's interesting. In 1988, we raised about $250,000 for Michael Dukakis, and that was considered unprecedented. By November 3rd of this year, we will hit $3 million nationwide from the gay and lesbian community, and that's identifiable lesbian and gay money. That we know, that we have copies of the checks, we know where they came from. Lord knows how much else is poured in from the direct mail and then other ways into the campaign. Between the grassroots participation and the money, we have made ourselves an intricate part of the American political process. I mean, I think it was one article, front page article in the Washington Post, that compared us now as a significant voting bloc like the American Jewish community or the Black community or the Hispanic community. That has never happened before.
I think it's also important that we understand that we have to keep doing that. We have to vote. We have to send the telegrams. We have to get out there and talk about the issues, because otherwise the lesbian and gay community is not going to be seen as having participated enough, as having coasted along. I mean, you talk about the turnaround, and I want to believe that and I want to see that happen, but I also think that we've got to be out there and we've got to fight to make it happen and make sure that we don't drop the ball at any point.
Let's talk about the Republican convention and the impact. We certainly were omnipresent at these two conventions in very different ways. Torie, maybe you'd like to start. What do you think the impact of that convention was on America and on our community?
Well, I think that the Republicans tried to declare this cultural war on us, tried to make us the Willie Hortons of this campaign, and I think they failed. I mean, it's clear now that it didn't work, that there's been a backlash against it. If anything, it's kind of galvanized liberal support and non-gay support to our side and to our issues. But I mean, I don't know how other people felt, but watching it was one of the most painful personal experiences, sitting alone in my living room, watching not one, not two, but 7 different speeches, every word of which had been approved by the Republican National Committee. It was this absolute message of hatred, and the way that Pat Buchanan's sort of lip curled up and his beady eyes. I mean, I felt like I was watching American fascism. As somebody said that Pat Buchanan speech, they said it was better in the original German, and it was a comment meant in jest, but it was terrifying. It was a terrifying specter of American popular fascism, validated by the Republican Party and the right wing right up there, and it was very scary. But it didn't work. It was a calculated risk, and thank goodness it didn't work.
So it didn't play.
Didn't play.
In Peoria, as they used to say.
What's interesting is I think they miscalculated, first of all, how many of us have come out of the closet. And it speaks very highly of coming out of the closet, because when they attacked us so vigorously, I mean, the Pat Buchanan speech, without a doubt, goes down in convention history as the most despicable, hate-filled, divisive speech I think ever given at a national political convention. What it did is not only impact us sitting here, or our friends in the community, our brothers and sisters, it impacted our parents. My aunts and uncles, my nieces got tears in their eyes in Denver because they knew they were talking about Uncle David. It impacted the people we work with, we go to school with, and they might not approve of our lifestyle all the time, or the choices we make in life, or how we conduct our life, but they don't want to see us persecuted. They don't want us to see us be the new victims of the Klan. And so, I mean, that's why it didn't work. And I think one of the reasons it didn't work is because we are out of the closet, more and more of us. And so instead of people guessing, saying, well, that's that abstract figure over there they're talking about, this mystery unknown, they were talking about my dad's
we're
son.
Their family, right.
But they also underestimated the gay and lesbian vote. They basically wrote that vote off, decided that it was either inconsequential numerically, or decided that it didn't matter whether or not we were in fact going to support their platform and their party. And they are the ones, the Republicans are the ones that came out of the closet as hate mongers. And not the mainstream Republicans, but the people who have grabbed leadership of the party today.
Exactly.
And that's really frightening. It's terrifying. As a member of both the African American community and the gay and lesbian community, I felt sort of double battered, double assaulted, and there was a kind of a deja vu, because I expected there to be a Willie Horton element to this. What are they going to try this time? They didn't aim it this time at African Americans. They aimed it at lesbians and gays. In 1988, to some extent it worked. This time it didn't work at all. The American public, I think, made it very, very clear that it didn't work, it wouldn't work, and that was not the way they wanted to hear a president or president's backers talk.
But let me ask you what it is exactly you think they misjudged. Because it seems like in backpedaling and talking about family values, which we've heard a lot about everywhere in this campaign, that it sounded like they wanted to soften a little bit, but not take away from the message that our lifestyle really is wrong, that it shouldn't be valued, that it shouldn't be out there. Do you think people would have been as upset with it if it hadn't been so blatant, so obvious, so much sort of bashing? Do you know what I mean, Torie?
Well, I think it's true. I think most Americans like to think of themselves as fair, and that in fact this right wing that has steamrolled over state Republican parties and the national convention is really out of touch. I mean, when 79% of the American people don't want us discriminated against, even though only 50% approve of our lives, I think was the way the Newsweek poll was, that most people don't want to hear that kind of rhetoric. They are out of touch with American people. That isn't to say we don't have our work cut out for us in terms of more and more of us need to come out and more of us need to share who we are with more people, and we need to raise the consciousness. We've got work to do, there's no question about it. But Americans do not like to think of themselves as bigots and as fascists, and they misjudged, they miscalculated how far they could push that message. They took the ultra-rights message and tried to make it play in mid-America, and it didn't go.
I think it also benefited, though, from a factor that we haven't really talked about, but that is really key here, and that is that you've seen the signs at various different campaigns. It's about the economy, stupid, aimed at President Bush, and I think that we benefited from a kind of serendipitous preoccupation or concern with what are you going to do to make my life and the life of my parents and my children and the people I care about better in this country. You haven't been doing anything thus far. Talk to me about that. And instead what spewed forth was hate.
You know what's interesting? It's the generational difference. George Bush, I bet if you asked him, would say, no, I don't know of any gay or lesbian people. I've never sit down with a gay or lesbian couple for dinner, or probably doesn't know any people who have died of AIDS or have ever been by the bedside. Both Al Gore and Tipper Gore and Bill and Hillary Clinton have gay and lesbian friends, they know of people who have died of AIDS. They've went through our journey with us. It's a clearly generational difference. The reason they miscalculated at the Republican convention, they've never taken time to get to know us. I think they are as stunned as anyone today about how powerful and sizable our vote is.
But you also said, there's a couple of things in there, David. One is what you said before about how the more people come out, the more everybody realizes they do know somebody, who's lesbian or gay. And so it personalizes that hatred almost to them.
And I think that that's partially why that effort at the Republican convention didn't work, because most people are saying at this point, wait a minute, we do know lesbian and gay people. They are our families. They are people that we care about. Don't you? And if you're the odd people out, if you don't know anybody that you can care enough about to not want to see treated the way you're talking about treating fellow Americans and human beings and people who are involved in our lives.
The Newsweek poll shows 78%.
Yeah.
Either work with somebody or know somebody who's gay.
So our families want to do what they want to do to us, but they don't want anybody else to do it to us.
Exactly.
But it was a calculated risk for them, don't you think? What do you think about the fact that some of the Republicans, especially President Bush and Vice President Kuehl, are now trying to distance themselves and saying, well, that's his point of view. That's the two paths. They might believe that.
It's the most cynical, awful kind of politics. They preached a doctrine of hate. There wasn't a speech that was given on that platform after 30 years of involvement in 8 political conventions. I can promise you every word of every speech was approved by the Republican National Committee before they got up on that platform. And now they've read their polls and they realize, oops, our hate didn't work. And so now they're trying to be a gentler, cozier bigot, and it's not going to work. The American people, Charles is right, they want jobs. They want the homeless to have homes. They want daycare. They want this country to be great again.
And they don't
want to hear any more of this hate.
And they don't want somebody saying, don't look at all those things, just look over in the corner at that whatever. Well, you may think we four are here together talking about this alone, but there's an extra person who's going to join us actually by the magic of tape. San Francisco County Supervisor Roberta Actenberg wasn't able to join us here today, but I caught up with her recently in West Hollywood, actually on the patio at Little Frida's, and we discussed the prominent role that lesbian and gay rights played in both the Democratic and the Republican national conventions. Well, Roberta, as I don't have to tell you, this is a pretty historic Democratic convention this year. A lot of people were sort of amazed, I think, tuning in. Tell us, why was this an important convention, if it was, for the gay and lesbian community?
It was surprising to all of us who were openly gay and lesbian delegates to the Democratic National Convention that we would have such a position of prominence at the convention, as well as in the minds and hearts of the media and of I think, people across the country.
But also, we had some presence, I think, in drafting the platform. I know you were involved.
But we had a greater impact on the formulation of the platform and of the battle within the party to get the platform accepted as the governing document than we ever have before. We were viewed as a very significant force. As I mentioned, I was appointed by Governor Clinton to be on the drafting committee of the platform. There's only 15 people on the drafting committee, and Clinton had 8 nominees to that committee, and I believe that he put me there knowing precisely what I would do. Lesbian and gay rights, of course, were spoken to in great detail. For the first time, we were not referred to in the platform by virtue of the term sexual orientation, but it said right in the platform, lesbian and gay. It acknowledged the existence of homophobia in precisely that term, and it committed the Democratic Party not only to eradicating discrimination, but basically supporting all of us in our struggle within society. And it made, it said in obvious, explicit detail that this is going to be the party that supports lesbian and gay rights.
We also had visibility of a type at the Republican convention in Houston, maybe of a slightly different variety. Would you attribute that, the attention that we got on that platform and in those speeches, to the same sort of thing, this growing political cloud and our visibility?
The kind of political power that we have helped to create, I think, has created a counterforce, perhaps equal in weight to the force that we have exerted and persuaded others to exert in our behalf. The Republicans and their dwelling on this issue, they had to dwell on their misogyny, on their racism, on their homophobia, sort of as a way of reassuring themselves, not only securing their right-wing base, but sort of reassuring themselves that they still existed. And in doing so, they sort of ended up underscoring us instead of undercutting us, which I think was a surprise to them. Certainly, it took them 2 or 3 weeks to realize that it wasn't playing in Peoria.
Okay, you haven't heard the half of it yet. Be sure not to leave us yet. We'll be back with David Mixner, Torie Osborn, and Charles Stewart in just a minute.
Pick up your telephone right now and call the number on your screen. Find out how you can enrich your family values by learning about your gay children.
We had no idea what the gay community was like.
Learn how these parents deal with their fears about attending parents' flag meetings.
One of my biggest fears was that I would see someone that I knew.
Call the telephone number on your screen right now and see how these parents have taken themselves to acceptance and beyond.
Because that parent does not know the positives yet about the gay community.
Welcome back to Get Used to It. Well, talking about both the conventions and sort of what we have been doing in the campaign, what we can expect maybe from the campaign, let's move a little bit more into the future. Supposing we do have an administration elected that is a friendly one to us, do you think there's a danger in that in terms of some complacency in our community, Charles?
Yeah, I do. I think that there's a lot. Number one, I think that the number one rule of politics is getting promises made kept, and we can be overly optimistic in assuming that in fact people will deliver on what they've promised us. That may not happen. It may very well be that that once in office there will be other pressures, there will be other priorities. It will be our responsibility to keep feet to the fire. That's why, again, it's so important that we go out, we vote, we be seen as a visible, supportive group of people who are dedicated to electing someone who will address our issues and our concerns. But I don't think that we can at all rest on our laurels. Number one, I think success brings its own kind of problems. And number two, other minority groups, including African Americans, have also been adopted as part of the essential support group of various candidates, Democratic candidates dating back to John Kennedy, and to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And that has certainly not solved all problems. It has created problems. If anything, this election process in America and the Democratic Party have been in flight from issues that concern minorities. That can happen to us as lesbians and gays unless we are both attentive and responsible in what we ask for and what we insist upon getting.
There's a kind of a luxury when you're on the outside. There's a luxury of unity. The community can come together. You have people who under a Clinton administration may well be facing Senate appointment, confirmation as appointees of a Clinton administration who are being arrested with ACT UP, when we're all together on the outside, when we're all together against the genocidal policies of a Reagan or a Bush. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens when the community is suddenly in a position where certain people possibly are going to get administration appointees, where we're going to be sending resumes to David Mixner to screen for Governor Clinton, for President, then President Clinton, to see. And it's going to be interesting to see how we face success. How do we both build the movement on the outside and keep that pressure up and accept the power and the responsibility that comes with having access to.
Well, Torie, it's been one of your main themes, I know, for years. No, seriously, right. And a good one, and I'm sure the task force board of directors was looking at this when they hired you, is this unity notion, this notion that room for all, but not necessarily in conflict or in trashing. It seems like it's going to be even worse, in essence, with the ins and the outs and the people who are going to work in politics. How do we avoid that?
I think it's going to force us to be incredibly mature and it's going to force us to be much smarter politically than we ever have been. And it also is going to be it's going to be exciting. I mean, I actually look at it as, I think it's great when Mixner's in the White House and, maybe Charles moves to White House. I think it's going to be great to have the kind of increase in role models, visibility, these appointments and this access to the president. The AIDS policies are going to turn around, the military ban and so forth. Because again, let us not forget, John Kennedy did not create the civil rights movement, but when he was elected, it moved the civil rights movement forward. The civil rights movement created the political opportunity for him to win, and then he helped move it forward. So there's this wonderful mixture of individuals, and I mean even gay and lesbian individuals in this case, and movements that change history. And we're going to see it framed in a different way than all of us, being arrested together on the outside and being angry at the guy who's against.
It's going to be interesting. It's going to start a whole new age for the gay and lesbian community. And we all are going to be needed. What we're talking about is diversity with respect, that we respect each other's roles that we have to play. We're going to have to keep Bill Clinton's feet to the fire. Some things we're going to get very easily, and some we're going to have to educate him. He is, after all, the governor of Arkansas and didn't come out of ACT UP to be president of the United States. So we're going to have to keep. The difference is when we tried to get into the White House before, we were arrested. This time we're going to be welcome into the White House, and we're going to be able to sit down and have a way and a vehicle to make our point.
So we'll be closer to his feet when we like that.
That's right, exactly. Closer to the feet. And and sometimes we might have to do sit-ins. And sometimes we're going to have to push our own leadership and to be more aggressive. But the key, I think, to all of this, and this is diversity with responsibility and with respect for the roles that we all have to play. The talents I offer are political, grassroots, bringing in, a broader coalition and networking with other people. We all have roles to play, and we all have skills and talents we've been given. ACT UP has played a very important role in this presidential campaign and forcing us to focus at times when we drift. Sometimes we didn't want to focus, but it was important that we do so. So I think we're just beginning. Mm-hmm. I don't think the Bill Clinton presidency is the end of our problems. I think it's the beginning of our journey into acceptance of responsibility and power in society as a whole.
The 60s began with Kennedy, the 60s, began with Kennedy. The 90s are going to begin with Clinton. And as I always like to say, the 90s are going to make the 60s seem like the 50s. So it's just the beginning.
When in 1960, when the first black voter registered in Sunflower County in Mississippi in 1964, today Sunflower County has a majority of its supervisors who are black. So that was just the beginning, just to be.
But I think it's also the beginning of the problems that we're going to face. I think that what we have to always bear in mind is that these are the kinds of problems we like. The kinds of problems that come from access, the kinds of problems that come from being in a room and arguing over fine points and how to implement an agenda rather than whether or not you're going to implement an agenda. I think that the lesbian and gay community is going to need incredible resources and is going to need to tap resources of maturity that we've worked on and we've developed to some extent, but they're going to become new. There are all kinds of other groups and all kinds of issues that are going to need to be addressed. I think it's going to be very important that we not simply consign ACT UP or any other group to banging on the door outside. As you say, in the event that we experience victory, they will have been a crucial part of that, and it's not enough to say, okay, now we'll go inside the door and we'll negotiate for you while you stay outside. It was not acceptable before, it won't be acceptable now. I think that that's an incredibly difficult kind of negotiation to work out, because indeed some people have certain types of skills, certain types of agendas, and other people don't. I think we're going to have to do the same thing with regard to other minority groups. One of the things that I do hear in the African American community is that as any group, including the lesbian gay community, becomes more visible and its issues get front burnered, then other groups who feel dispossessed, who feel alienated, naturally become concerned as to whether or not they're going to be able to keep their scraps of the pie. And that is going to be an issue that we're going to need all of our resources and all of our diversity in order to address. And
so instead of the big tent, we're going to have the big room. I mean, this is where, in essence,
we got to cook a bigger pie.
That's right. And we got to make sure all of us get inside.
Exactly.
It isn't sufficient to leave some of us outside.
And one of the things I think we should forget, our oppressors are not going to go away with Bill Clinton being elected. I think we will find that one of the things, and boy, I couldn't agree with you more, and it's such a good point, Charles, that will bring us together and force us to recognize that and help us to bring us all in the door together or out of the door together, whichever that door is going around, which way, is Roberta Actenberg, who you just heard spoke, is a leading contender to be a major appointment in the Clinton administration. Jesse Helms, Phil Gramm, Alan Simpson, the same lynch mob that went after Anita Hill is going to go after her. And as much as some of us would like the luxury of some of those fine points, I think our oppressors, once again, are going to serve as an organizing tool to refocus us and say, we are still an oppressed minority. And if we don't take care of ourselves and each other, then we're going to lose.
And the better we do, the harder they push.
Exactly.
I also think we ought to remember that even if the right wing gets defeated in these heinous initiatives in Oregon and Colorado this November as Bill Clinton gets elected, they are already planning to run him in Ohio and in several other states. They're not going to stop. The right wing, although it may temporarily get displaced from power at the top, is not going to stop. They have a mobilization the likes of which we've never seen in this country's history on the far right. And they're not going to stop. So our battle, in fact, is going to be on several fronts. It's going to be how to be sort of grow into a new level of maturity on the inside, how to balance the sort of inside-outside game, how to make sure that the pie gets recooked so that there's a little more inclusiveness and the scarcity model gets maybe expanded a little bit, and and gays and lesbians are in the middle of the griddle of this fight with the right wing. And how are we going to continue to articulate, to fight that fight, to organize against it at the same time as we're opening doors for really, let's face it, a select few of our community to get on the inside. It's going to be very interesting. And I like to think that we have the resources, the sort of spiritual and political resources kind of just forged from fighting AIDS and from 20 years of a movement. We're not a new movement now after 20 years. We're a movement that's continued to grow and to reshape itself in the face of shifting crises. And I think we're up to the challenge, but it's going to be one.
Well, something that all of you really talked about was sort of a panoply of issues, some of which you referred to as easy, which is if we do have a Clinton White House, maybe he's going to allow this or do this, or the executive order, maybe even the civil rights bill, if we have one, will get his backing. Then there were other issues that weren't going to be so easy. Domestic partnership, for instance. The family issues that don't seem to play as well in the Newsweek poll or Peoria or wherever. And that seems to be where pressure needs to be kept on, because it seems, I think something that you said, Torie, that by keeping the pressure on, we legitimate the requests, in a sense. There's a movement out there that was there for the election, and it's going to be there after the election, keeping up a kind of pressure, testifying. If we're moving into the legislative process and we want to domestic partners, somebody has to go there and testify about why this is right, why it's like everybody else's family, why we deserve the same protections, that sort of thing. So there'll be a lot of roles. The other thing, when you said a few who've been active or whatever are going to probably be the ones, one of the things I'm not sure, maybe you can correct me, that we've done so well is the youth that you were talking about, getting this experience, getting not just door-to-door raising money experience, but what about the kind of experience that will allow us to have thousands of people ready to do all of these jobs on the local level and,
I think we've been a training ground the last 20 years, especially the last 10 years fighting AIDS. I think we've been a training ground for I think we have so much less mediocrity than the non-gay world, I have to tell you. But I think we have so many people whose resumes Mixner's going to pass on to Clinton for all of these positions and all of these appointments. I don't really think that's going to be a problem. I think the talent is there. Whether the people, and we're going to be keeping Mixner accountable too. I mean, there's a level at which this is going to be a most interesting process, this taking of power and this accessing this new presidential political map.
I think Charles made a very valid point when he said we're going to have to hammer out the fine points of how we all work together with new responsibilities and new visions, new agendas. We're going to have to learn new ways, and newness means the unknown, and sometimes that generates fear, and sometimes we're going to have to sit down and learn new ways to communicate with each other of it. And I'm just going to refer all those people who call for resumes to Torie.
Because she'll be in Washington anyway.
And she's already got me moved out of Los Angeles, and I'm not. And I kind of like it here. But I think that's really, really important, is that this is all new to us. And we forget that once that executive order is signed, suddenly we're going to have captains in the military, lieutenants in the military, generals.
Actually, we have captains and lieutenants in the military, but they'll be out.
They'll be out, and they'll be able to excel in their jobs openly. And that's going to be a whole new role model for young gay and lesbian youth. We'll have our war heroes,
and of course that's what they've been afraid of.
We'll have our Colin Powells. Well, and as an old pacifist, that's hard for me.
It will still only happen provided that we get out and we vote, and we make sure that Clinton and his supporters know we were there.
And we have 1 million people in Washington on April 25th.
Exactly.
Okay, talk about opportunities, and I also want to talk to you about the downsides too. When we come back, don't go away.
This is just one of the many parts you can play as a young Red Cross volunteer. Volunteer and play your part.
Kathy, you must always remember that hitting is not acceptable. You're bigger, you're stronger. Don't hit. Whenever you feel yourself getting angry, you take time out. You know what time out is. You cool off and keep yourself from doing something you're going to be sorry for later. Do you understand?
Well, do you? Take time out. Don't take it out on your child.
Welcome back to Get Used to It. We're talking about the election, the impact on our gay and lesbian community, and the impact of the community on the election. So we've been talking a lot about Mr. Clinton and his chances for success and how wonderful the Democratic Convention was. So here we are in the last segment of the show, and I want you to be really honest now. What's the downside for us? Clinton can't be a perfect candidate for the gay and lesbian community, and there are some critiques. Maybe we should talk about the sodomy law in Arkansas, AIDS funding. Let me start with you, David, because I'll bet you've had to answer this before.
I've had to answer it, and there's two levels that you have to look at it. One, Clinton's not perfect. Like I said, he did not emerge out of ACT UP. He emerged out of the governor of Arkansas, and we have education to do. It's sort of like Nixon going to China, Clinton coming to the lesbian and gay community. He can get away with it coming out of Arkansas. You know, in the sodomy laws, I mean, I think it's also the second aspect of it is we got to have our facts right. When he was Attorney General, he was the first Attorney General in the history of Arkansas to include the repeal of sodomy and a package to reform a whole set of laws that were antiquated. The legislature voted unanimously out of the package overnight. The next time the sodomy law repeal was put on into the legislature was this year. From that unanimous rejection of it, Clinton immediately endorsed the repeal of the sodomy law. The legislature refused to appropriate funds for AIDS in Arkansas, which has about 300 or 400 AIDS cases total in the state. Clinton had a governor's fund, discretionary fund, and took the largest amount possible and allotted it to the Little Rock AIDS Project. Him and Hillary both agreed to be co-chairs of the Heartstrings fundraising event in Arkansas. The man doesn't have an evil record, doesn't have a bad record, nor does he have a distinguished record like a Tsongas or Brown. You know, and it's important that as we understand the historical significance of what we're going through, that we don't turn him into something that he isn't, either as the all-time great evil or the all-time white knight that's going to save us from everything possibly bad. What he is a man who's willing to meet us halfway, to work with us, to give us access, to set us at the table, you know, who will work with us through our solutions. He will not be perfect. We will have many disagreements with this administration at times, but that's okay. Our responsibility is to make it happen. And so I think it's important that we keep it in perspective. Bottom line for me, in this choice in the presidency, our lives depend on it. This election will determine whether people who are HIV positive have a greater chance of living or dying. This election will determine for me whether a woman will run the risk of going back into the alleys and having abortions performed, or whether she will have the dignity of her making her own choice. And that's what this election's about for me. It's a very clear-cut thing for me. But to do that, I don't have to make him perfect to vote for him, nor do I have to make him evil to vote for him. He is a good man who is making a real effort and outreach to this community as the first nominee of our party in history to do so.
And to use the words openly in the
Exactly.
convention. I mean, that was amazing.
And he's kept his promises to us so far.
Well, Charles, how's Clinton playing in the communities, in Senator Watson's district, for instance?
Well, I think that of course, the overwhelming majority of our district is African American, and the overwhelming majority of voters in that district are, and that's the community from which I come. And what I hear about Clinton is some ambivalence. I hear that I support his election. I believe that he's a lot better than the Bush alternative. I certainly believe he's a lot better than the Perot alternative. And yet I think that for the most part, he's a man whose promise has not yet been called upon, and he hasn't had an opportunity, or much of an opportunity at least, to deliver it. I think that to date, what we've got are some promises. We've got some good promises, and that's more than we've gotten from a lot of other candidates. But it's not the best, it's not the most, and I think that we're going to have to hold his feet to the fire, and we're going to have to see how much of what is delivered stintingly, and how much of it is delivered willingly. I think that the man is sincere, and that to me is a lot. I think that he is a candidate who has shown a willingness to respect individual freedom. And that's incredibly important. It's not enough. We have more needs than that. We have the ongoing war against AIDS. We have to protect choice. We have, in the African American community, we have enormous needs, enormous issues, and a rising sense of dissatisfaction. And the gulf between the races grows ever greater.
And they haven't really dealt with any of our local stuff yet. I mean, to some extent, there hasn't been a lot of attention in California and in our LA community to talk about the aftermath of the uprising, for instance, and how emergency aid didn't quite make it, and federal funding we're having some problems with, which of course we can't blame on Clinton since it's not his. You know,
up until now, he hasn't had the opportunity, and I'm waiting to see whether or not he's going to deliver upon it, to deliver on the promises that have been made. And I think that again, it's so important that we be a visible, supportive segment of his victory, so that, assuming that there is a victory, so that we have the right to step to the fore and say that we have been part of that victory. We believed in you, and now we want to share in what that victory means. If you're going to create that kind of a world.
Speaking of believing in you, I wanted to ask Torie a question because, well, historically the lesbian community, I won't forget you wanted to talk about that, but Historically, the lesbian community has been very disaffected about electoral politics. I mean, mostly the radical arm that said, don't ever do that, don't believe in that, don't go that way, stay in the street. But even now, I think, it's sort of, I see the other half of the lesbian community who doesn't want to be involved, maybe doesn't want to be very out, just wants to do family and, you know, whatever. And how do we get them to work?
I see it a little differently. I mean, I think that the lesbian community's issues have not always been well identified or articulated by the broader gay and lesbian movement. But I think increasingly that's changing, and a lot of those are issues around family. Gay marriage is a very big issue in the lesbian community. Domestic partnership, parenting, step-parent adoption, all those kinds of issues. And I think those are beginning to change. But I also think that part of the lesbian community's invisibility, part of the main problem with the lesbian community is its invisibility, and so it kind of gets mythologized. I think a lot of stuff gets thrown on the lesbian community that may or may not be a part of it. What I see in general that the American people, and the lesbian community is no different, are pretty much fed up with politics as usual. This is not a lesbian issue. This is an American political problem. We have a grave dissatisfaction, in fact, despair. The polls show, you know, increasingly fewer and fewer people participating in national elections, increasing fewer and fewer people participating in local elections. The polling place, electoral politics, has not, until recently, over the last 40 years, been in decreasing amounts, been seen as a place where people, in fact, feel empowered. So I think that's changing. Although many people who are my political friends disagree with term limits, I think it's a healthy infusion of some changes. I think we're going to see a lot more gay men and lesbians, and yes, lesbians as well, running for office. I think this is healthy. I think what you're going to see, and again, I see Bill Clinton as a symptom. I see him as the beginning of the 90s, you know, and I look at the general apathy that people feel. It's a cynicism. It's a disconnection. It's a feeling that we felt in the 60s. We felt it. We didn't think that electing people in office was what was going to save us. We felt that we had to take it in our own hands and build broad-based social movements that would affect policy, would affect those people who were elected. It was rare for me anyway, in the 60s, and many people in my generation, to really feel ownership of the political process. This has now become an American disease. It was a small percentage of sort of disenfranchised peoples. So I know I'm straying from the lesbian question.
Well, not really, but I want to hear if you think it's different, too.
I think it's going to change. This is what I feel so hopeful about. I mean, I recognize that Bill Clinton is not perfect, but I see ordinary lesbians who have never been politically involved holding house parties by the hundreds. I see them wanting to vote. I see hope happening. And when expectations are raised, is the beginning of great social change. And that's what I think we're going to look at in the 90s.
And I think Anita Hill's torture was just as much of a big deal for lesbians as it was for straight women. I mean, we've all been sexually harassed. Doesn't matter. They don't go, excuse me, are you queer? I'm not going to sexually harass you. So everybody was just incensed, and it was galvanizing, I think, as well as choice for our community.
I want to make a point. You know, sometimes we have to travel so far, and we've been through so much, we forget how much we've accomplished in very short period of time spans. You know, and if you want to know if we can trust Clinton, if he's sincere, which, you know, I agree with you, he's very sincere, all we have to do is look back the last couple of months. He's done some very courageous actions, which, you know, it's turned out okay for him. But he didn't know that when he did them. When he made the speech before the gay and lesbian community at the Palace, many people in the Democratic Party told him not to do it if the press was going to be present. Right. I mean, he had a lot of pressure from, you know, traditional politicians in the party. Don't do that. They'll make you the Willie Horton. You know, they'll Willie Hortonize you. And he came anyhow. Right. And he spoke to us anyhow, fully aware that the Republicans were going to try to make lesbians and gays the Willie Horton, which they did. The analysis was correct. What was incorrect is that it didn't work.
Right, and didn't hurt him as much as they wanted to.
But he didn't know that, and we didn't know that. I had gay and lesbian people call and tell me, don't let him come. It will hurt him. People from our own community. But he did. Who among us can forget Bob Hattoy, Roberta Actenberg, you know, speaking before the convention?
Well, let me say, I could talk to you guys for another hour and a half, and probably will while they're rolling the credits, and afterward we'll all go to dinner. What the heck? But we don't have enough time, so what I'd like to ask is if each of you would take about a minute and do any kind of wrap-up statement that you'd like to cover anything we haven't covered or whatever, and then we'll say goodnight. Charles, would you start?
Sure. I think what we have to remember is that politics is the art of the possible. And that means that you don't, in a real world, you don't get ideal choices. And being an adult means you don't expect ideal choices. It means that you look at your opportunities, you look at the track record, you look at the statistics, you analyze what your interest is, and you do the best you can. And here it's fairly clear where our interest lies. Certainly there are concerns I have about Clinton's record. There are concerns I have about the way that he's dealt with Jesse Jackson, the sister soldier things, which I think were simply missteps. But I think that the opportunity remains for there to be healing. Certainly, he has reached out to the lesbian and gay community in ways we have to respond to and we have to support. It's in our ball court, and I think we have to do it.
Torie?
Well, I guess the most important thing is to recognize that this is the beginning of a new era of responsibility as well as of impact. And I just want people to recognize that, as that old community organizer Saul Alinsky taught many of us, each person, no matter how not an activist, has a direct sphere of influence of 200 people. And if we call our friends and we call our old high school buddies and we call our parents and our sisters and brothers and all those people that we think might be lurking out there ready to vote for Bush for whatever reasons, and talk about how important this is, talk about that this is life and death for women and for people with AIDS, we can make an absolutely historic impact. And it's time for everybody to step up to that challenge.
David?
I think that never in our lives has the voting booth been more important to us as a community. Never really have we had much to go into the voting booth for as a community. I think it is the most important thing as a community we're about to do, is to walk into that polling place and into that booth and vote this year. And not only for Bill Clinton, but for Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer, to give them the kind of Senate we need to make this happen. And I think that lives are at stake, a future's at stake, the Supreme Court's at stake, and the whole hopes and dreams of a future generation are at stake. This is the most important election we have faced in decades in this country, since maybe the first election of Franklin Roosevelt, and we better understand it and vote.
Thank you all very much. There you have it. It's the first edition of Get Used to It. We know for sure there's going to be 5 more shows in the coming months, and we hope that you'll stay with us and tell your friends to tune us in, because if this was an example of what you have coming, it's going to be pretty good. Thank you very much, and I have 3 things then to say to you. The first is vote. The second is vote. And the third, you'll be not surprised to hear, is vote. Good night.